And then, like I said, ThunderLizards, they sort of go through this period of gestation where they swim across the Pacific Ocean, and then they emerge with an attitude, right? And so, they come out of the Pacific Ocean, they say, I'm going to take out my can and whoop ass on somebody, right? And so then that's when they start to make trouble. And so, the first thing that ThunderLizards usually do is they take out their startup competitors. They sort of never know what hit them. Just take out the big jaws and chomp them in two. And then they rarely stay anonymous for long. They start making a name for themselves in other ways, and then they really start making life difficult for the incumbent companies, which is represented by these little cars that he's chewing up. So the ThunderLizard metaphor always sort of worked for me because it reminded me of that movie Godzilla, how he would go through Tokyo and be spraying fire on stuff and throwing cars around and trains and climbing buildings and tearing holes and things, right? And that's what ThunderLizards try to do. And so that's what we're really going to talk about now. And before I jump into it, some people say, well, why is it worth the effort? It sounds like kind of an arrogant way to look at companies, actually. There's plenty of great companies in town, and many of them are valuable, and they provide great services to people. Why are you so hung up on ThunderLizards? Why are they even worth the effort in the first place? Well, it just so happens that one of my investors is a limited partners, they call them, has invested over the course of the last 30 years, a little bit more, in fact. And they've invested in some of the very best firms, firms you've heard of like, Kleiner Perkins and Matrix and Benchmark and, folks like that. And he told me something pretty interesting once. He said even among those very best firms, that 9% of the money invested has resulted in 91% of the profits. And so it's not the 80-20 rule, it's the 991 rule of returns. And by the way, those are the companies that get funded by awesome VC firms. That says nothing about the companies that don't get funding or don't raise funding. And so from a private company point of view, ThunderLizards really drive the business. But it also turns out that now let's say that you're a private company that's so lucky to go public. The same thing happens yet again. And so I remember actually earlier this decade, Mary Meeker once told the industry that in the first 21 years after the IBM PC, there were a little over 1,700 IPOs, and 5% created 92% of the wealth. And so, over and over again, we see how the tech business is a winner-take-all business, and that, the companies that are the best in their chosen markets don't just do slightly better than the other companies, they do massively better. Back to the example of Twitter earlier, their big competitor in the early days was this company called Jaiku. I don't know if people remember who Jaiku even was. I can't even remember what they got bought for. Less than 20 million bucks, maybe less than 10. And who knows, maybe Twitter won't be worth that much someday, but I would bet that Twitter is going to be at least 1 or 2 zeros more valuable when it exits. And then similarly, I remember when we invested in Dig, we had competitors like Delicious and Reddit and guys like that. And I would again assert that Dig will be at least 1, if not 2 zeros more valuable than those companies. From a macro perspective, we talked about this already. In any tech market, number one, hey Rudy, number one is awesome. Number two is so-so. And by the way, this isn't true just in the tech market. This is true in soft drink business. This is true in most markets as they mature and evolve. Almost everything else is forgotten. And so it turns out that if you want to be big and valuable, the only rational strategy is to be number one. Because the benefits that accrue to being number one are so overwhelmingly greater than being even number two, and certainly greater than being number three, that it's literally irrational not to pursue it. The other thing is that ThunderLizards are the primary drivers of wealth creation for entrepreneurs and investors, which we talked about. But just out of curiosity, how many people in this audience have ever worked for Dell? Okay, so fair enough. How many people have ever done business with Dell? Either were a supplier or an agency or whatnot. How many people have bought products from Dell? So you look at a company like Dell. Dell isn't important just for what Dell did, right? Dell is important because it had a ripple effect on the Austin community. And so ThunderLizards are important, not out of a sense of arrogance, but out of a sense of humility, right? ThunderLizards are important because when they happen, they make things better for all of us. And that's why they're so important. So I want to talk a little bit about hatching a ThunderLizard. And unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to go through all of these points. But I will highlight a few. So ThunderLizards start with a combination of nature and nurture. So the first thing I think about when I look at, is a company going to be a ThunderLizard, is I look at a set of things that are fairly independent of the team, actually, fairly independent of the execution. I want to know, does the company come from sort of good breeding, right? Are there a set of conditions that make it likely to be successful if we execute? And the things that we look for are a visionary entrepreneur, a huge potential market, a fundamental advantage, and modest capital requirements. In fact, my colleague Ann, who works with me in California, said, don't explain too much of this. This is our patent-pending secret ThunderLizard incubation hatching formula, so I can't talk too much about it. But the other thing is that from a nature side, or from a nurture side, ThunderLizards have a set of attitudes that increase the probabilities of success. And so, a couple of them are customer development in parallel with product development. If anybody's ever read Steve Blank's book, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, it is a must-read for any entrepreneur. A complete team, which includes business vision, business execution, technical vision, and technical execution. An experimental mindset, which dictates that it's not your vision versus my vision that matters. Facts only exist outside the building. And what we're trying to do is get facts and not talk about our assumptions and opinions to each other. And then different, not better. Now, I'm going to explore just a few of these topics. I'm not going to have time to do them all. So what I thought I would do is pick out a few that I thought I wish entrepreneurs got right more often, that I think are really important. See how I'm doing for time so far. Okay, not too bad. So the first is the importance of being non-consensus and right, or having unconventional wisdom. So this is a picture of Osman Rashid of Chegg. So Chegg, I described earlier, is a textbook rental site. I wish I could talk about their revenues, but suffice it to say that they've had single days where they've rented more than $1 million a book in a single day. So they're off to a really good start. Now, the irony with Chegg is that we couldn't even get it funded for the longest time. And one of the problems that people had with it was they said, well, Varsity Books didn't try to rent textbooks, but they were in the textbook business, and they went through a whole bunch of money and had nothing to show for it. And, in fact, other college campuses have tried to rent textbooks before, and I just don't think it's going to happen. And then the other issue that we had that I realized in hindsight was a lot of the people that we were pitching to were like, well, my kid's in college, and they wouldn't rent a textbook. But I was sort of like, yeah, but you're a rich VC, right, who's paying for his kid's education, right? And so it wasn't intuitively obvious, and so it was hard to get funded. But Osman understood a couple of things. First, he understood that there was a huge shift in the usage of computing, that students now lived in Facebook. They didn't use computers just to do word processing and spreadsheets and stuff like that. They were on their computers all the time. And so they were very comfortable doing things digitally, buying, selling, communicating. The second thing that he understood is that there's an education bubble in the United States. And it's something that I think is underreported. I mean, it's clear that the costs of education, particularly private education, are growing much more rapidly than the cost of living as a whole. And so students have more and more incentives every year to find ways to save money.